Right, part 2 of the question is the PBT note. It's quite vague. It's not telling you exactly what needs to be disclosed. Remember also, the PBT note is quite simply just a list of disclosable items. That's it, it's a list. You can prepare it in whatever format you like. It needs a little heading, i.e. what you're doing, and I choose to split the PBT note into income and expenses. It's just easier. What I suggest you do also when doing the PBT note is just go for the easier items first. So any of the disclosable items that were obvious from the question, identify those and pop them straight into the answer. So in this question, we had the insurance proceeds for both the building and the computer and software. The figures are easy, just add them up and put them in the answer. We had the rent of the computers from the Paarl municipality, 3 months of 50K, 150, put it in your answer. And lastly, we had the research costs of 15K. Again, it's disclosable, just pop it into your answer. Once you've done all of that, then move on to the ones which require more complex calculations. So the depreciation, the amortization, the impairment losses, of which there are several, and the possible impairment losses. Start with the depreciation and amortization because those are probably the easier ones to start with and will be quite a few marks, especially the depreciation, because remember, there's 4 categories of PP&E assets. Then move on to the impairment loss calculations and think about the possibilities. We've got the building that was damaged in a fire. We've got the component of the pumps that needed to be replaced. Whatever the carrying value was at the date it was replaced will be impaired. And then we've got the computer and the software that were both destroyed in the floods. So all of those 4 items, 4 possible impairment losses. And then you have to think about reversals. Now, if an asset has been destroyed, there can't possibly be a reversal. So the computer, the software, and the motor, definitely no impairment loss reversal. But the building, the question told you, was restored to its original condition. And therefore, that implies that there could be an impairment loss reversal. And so you need to check for that as well. So this part of the question is quite calculation intensive. There's no presentation of format really because it's just a list. So you're going to spend most of your time and most of your marks will be earned on doing the calculations. Right, we're now moving on to part 2 of Aqua Limited, the solution. What we're going to do is we're going to look at this solution in 2 parts because it's quite calculation heavy. So the first part is going to focus on depreciation, amortization, and some of those calculations. And then the second part, we're going to focus on any impairment losses and reversals. Just going to be easier for us. So remember what we're doing here. We're disclosing items in the PBT note. Just think back to what you've seen in the question. There's some PP&E assets, so there's depreciation there. We know there's an impairment loss on the admin building. There's probably also an impairment loss on the computer and the software. We know there's amortization of intangible assets. We also know that there was some rent of computers and the insurance settlement. Now my suggestion is, remember what I said to you, the PBT note is just a list of disclosable items. So what you should do is just prepare the skeleton of the note as it stands, the heading, profit before tax includes the following items, and just split it. I choose to split it between income and expenses. That is just how I choose to do it. It's not because it has to be. I just find it's easier if I split it between income and expenses. So what I suggest you do is just start your PBT note, put a heading in income, put a heading in expenses, and straight away put in the items that were easily identified and easily calculated. So if we look at under income, those 2 figures were given, compensation for impairment loss from the insurance companies. So put them in straight away, and in probably 30 seconds, you've earned 1.5 marks. The figures do not need to be separately disclosed, so just add them together. The 3 million from the admin building and the 1 million from the computer and the software. 4 million, done and dusted. Similarly, under expenses, there's some easy items as well. Remember the rent of the computers from the Pole Water Board, 3 months times 50K, pop that in. Rent expense 50,000 times 3. It's nice and easy, 150,000. Remember also the research costs, 15,000 given in the question, put it in. And again, in probably less than a minute, you've earned another 2.5 marks. So always go for the easy, obvious ones first, because you don't want to miss out on those marks. Then move on to the ones which are more complicated. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at the depreciation and amortization calculations first, disclose them. As you calculate them, disclose them, and then we'll separately do the impairment losses and possible impairment loss reversals. Just remember as well for depreciation that it's just one figure, depreciation on PP&E. So you do all the calculations separately, add it together, and pop the answer into your PBT note. Right, so let's go down to depreciation. We've got 4 non-current assets, the buildings, the plant, the pump with its separate component, and the computer hardware. Right, so let's look at the admin building. So the admin building was impaired halfway through the year. So what we did is we depreciated the original building for 6 months, and then after it is impaired, we take the recoverable amount and depreciate it over the rule. So you can see 7.2 million divided by 30 years for 6 months was based on the original cost, and then 3.6 million divided by 26 years. Remember we said the asset is 4 years old, therefore rule is 26 years, and that is for only 6 months. So 120K, 69,231, the depreciation on the admin building. Moving on to the next one, the water bottling plant. There were no complications with this one. The useful life was 15 years, so 3 million divided by 15 years for the entire year. 200,000 was the depreciation for the plant. Now the electric pump. You can see that I've split it into 3 calculations. The pump by itself, the old motor, and then the new motor. There's several different ways that you can do this, and you don't have to calculate this depreciation the way I've chosen to do it. I just think that this is one of the easiest ways. The minute you've got something a little bit peculiar with an asset, just try and deal with it separately. It's probably easier. So let's look at the pump first. I took the original cost, 2.8 million. I subtracted 600,000, which was the implied cost of the old pump. Remember, we didn't separate it. But what the IFRS says is, if you do replace a component, then you estimate a cost for the original component. And in fact, that estimate could be the cost of the new component. But in this question, we were able to get a value for the old component. So we subtract 600,000, and then we multiply this by the number of kilolitres produced in the current year, which was 5 million plus 6 million, divided by the total estimated useful life. So the cost, excluding the old motor, divided by 70 million times 11 million done in the current year. 345,715 is the depreciation on the pump, and 2 marks for that calculation. Not terribly difficult. You did it in second year. Moving on to the old motor. Remember, we didn't separate it, so we have to depreciate it over the old number of kilometres. So 600,000, and that would have been depreciated for 6 million kilolitres in the current year, divided by 70 million. And lastly, the new motor. That will be done over the 5 million kilolitres done in the second half of the year, but very importantly, its useful life is 35,000 kilolitres. So that's the depreciation that we will use for the new motor. So those 3 figures together is the depreciation on the pump. And then lastly, the computers. Remember, we're only depreciating the old computers, as the new computers were only ready for use at the end of the year. So their depreciation will start next year. So the computers, the original useful life was given as 5 years, and we only depreciate up until 31 December, not 31 December, 1 December, which is for 9 months. And so depreciation of 240,000. And then you can just see I've added in a little comment on the solution, why no depreciation on the new computer, but I've answered that for you. So just remember that. In total, depreciation 1,140,660. Now you can see that was quite a lot of marks at the end of the day, close to 10 marks, and then just using your figure, popping it in, and there we go. In fact, it was 9 marks. Pop it in straight away, don't wait, because otherwise if you run out of time, you've lost some marks. So put it in, 1,140,660. Right, let's move down now to the amortization of the software. Again, just to remind you, we're not amortizing the new software because it hasn't yet been put into use. So the old software, $1 million, divided by 5 years, multiply by 9 over 12, 150K, and pop that into your PBT note as well. And there it is, amortization of intangible assets, 150K. Right, so that's the end of this part of the solution. We're going to do a separate video for the calculation of the impairment losses because there's a few and it's going to be a little bit complex.